People who like to explore abandoned buildings. What was the biggest beep this I'm out moment you had while exploring? This is not scary but it's interesting story. My friend was walking in the forest and found old house. When he moved some stuff the ceiling broke and old German light machine gun fell down. Was it a place you'd expect to find a German machine gun? Like Germany or Argentina? Slovenia. Central Europe. During WW2 there was a lot of German camps. I walked into an old abandoned cabin in my neighborhood. I saw movement around me and when I shined my flashlight to the walls there were thousands of cockroaches and spiders on the walls. I noped right out of there. Just reading this made my scalp itch. Hope you didn't bring any hitchhikers home. Came very close to a black widow spider and noped the beep out. Been bit 3 times. They ain't that bad. Uncomfortable. Yes. But unless you're old, a baby, or have pre-existing conditions that'd be worsened by the venom, you'll be fine. My remedy is some Advil and alcohol. Works like a charm. Name probably checks out. It wasn't abandoned. Imagine some teens/adults coming in with FB boards and cameras when you're making dinner lol. Sorry, I thought this place was abandoned. Excuse me? I don't walk into your house and insult you. As 12-year-old kids, we were exploring the woods as kids do. The forest parted to an open field and in the distance was an abandoned farm. Naturally we crept inside and in one of the horse stalls were all discarded hypodermic needles and old food. Our parents were quite mad when we told them what we found. Same. But in an old warehouse by the edge of the city. We also found porn comic books. Which we took home because we were 12-year-old girls seeing porn for the first time. It led to a long talk by our parents about how porn can be demeaning to women and doesn't reflect how sex should be. In retrospect, I'm glad for the talk. And glad we took the porn instead of the used needles. I like how instead of yelling at you for bringing porn from an old warehouse they give you a sex ed lesson. We found a stack of old computers in an abandoned house on the outskirts of our town. When we opened one of the computers, it was filled with nothing but LDP0RN. 3 of the guys I was with ditched because they didn't want to get involved or convicted. I just called the police and they took them. There was a good 6 to 7 terabytes. Truly disgusting people in this world. Bit more context. I was 13 when this happened and had no idea what to do or who to call. I realized that I should have called child services. Some kind of child abuse hotline or reported to the police anonymously, but I was a young kid and was never told what to do in a situation like that. All I knew that it was wrong and some kind of authority had to be called and 911 was the only one I knew of. I probably would have been one of your friends that dipped. Too many good Samaritans have taken falls for less. You did the right thing. I probably would have submitted an anonymous report. Yep. Exactly. No way in hell I trust the cops to not get fidgety. My friends and I went into the Gibraltar mansion in Wilmington. Today. It was cool until we came across a room with an older man squatting in it. He was terrified of us and we felt pretty horrible. So we left after apologizing. Why was he squatting? To assert dominance? Squatting is a term used to describe homeless people living in abandoned buildings or homes that they do not own. Not like squatting down or kneeling. Dead crows and satanic symbols on the walls in an abandoned building on an island. That's the kind of generic speep you'd find in a cliché horror game. God. Why can't Satan worshippers be original for once? SMH. Probably teens and their hijinks. Not actual Satanists imo. Friend's leg fell through the floor. and their leg was never seen again. He shouldn't have dropped it. I've been many places in the tri-state area and have experienced floors that are decaying. Once almost fell. Thankfully was a very small drop. Needles, animal corpses, etc. One time at a prison in New Jersey I saw a cell that was decked out with a decorated dollhouse and you could tell someone was staying there. The creepiest experience I ever had was about 6 years ago. I was in an abandoned hospital in a residential part of NYC which had been abandoned less than a decade prior to our visit. Despite this, it was not a well-known location. We went at night and were exploring the second, third, and fourth floors all without issue and in total silence. There was little to no graffiti and everything was left: patient records and tissue samples, medicines, medical equipment. As we reached the fourth floor, we passed a random room that said no explosive gases can be used in this room. I read the sound aloud and we immediately heard a huge thud coming from inside that exact room. My blood ran cold and I literally froze because I felt that someone in that room was making themselves known. We ran out of there and heard slamming doors as we went down all the stairs. I have not been back there since and it's now been sold and is being renovated into a housing complex. I still wonder what would have happened if we went into the room. Chances are it was just a homeless person camping out, as many of these likely are. On the other hand, it could be someone smuggling, moving around CP, or just a nutcase lying in wait. Either way, if you had gone into that room you might not be here to type this out. Man found what looked like the remains of a pig and it was wearing lingerie. Don't talk about my mother like that. I do urban exploring quite frequently and nothing ever makes us leave instantly apart from dodgy floors or squatters. However, 5 years ago me and a few friends explored a derelict farmhouse with outbuildings which had evidently been left for decades with the state it was in. After having a look around the place and finding nothing but empty buildings, we had a look inside what appeared to be an old stable. Inside was literally hundreds of empty tins of cat food, some nooses tied to a beam and a fairly new pair of scissors with a brownish crust covering the blades. The smell was putrid. We ventured further into the building and noticed on the flood was a cat's tail and a few cat's paws which had been dismembered and left on the floor. We swiftly exited and on our way out a pickup pulled up onto the side of the farm, bearing in mind it was surrounded by woods and fields with no track leading to it, with 3 men stood in the bed. Needless to say, we got out of there as quick as we could and haven't seen or heard anything about it. The farm went on the market and sold earlier this year, so it would be interesting to see who previously owned it. I do urban exploration with my camera as well, and this exact scenario is my nightmare. To be honest, that location was bad but not the worst I've been to. The worst was a big old sign printing factory in the middle of a city, and we have never all had such a consistently bad guy feeling about a place. So we got out of there. Best advice would be to always follow your gut when exploring. My friends and I were exploring an abandoned military housing complex at night. It was in pretty bad shape, but there were lots of interesting things to see. We almost pissed ourselves a couple times because of mannequins behind doors and stuff. There was also a neat art installation with records hanging from the ceiling. Anyway, we climbed up some stairs to the tallest part of the building. We saw some faint light coming from under a door. Somehow the door had been booby-trapped. And as soon as my friend opened it, there was a crash, and a cinder block on a rope that came swinging out the open door and just missed us. I got a split-second look inside where I saw a small fire, a mattress on the ground, and then a man moving quickly toward us. He was silhouetted by the light, so I couldn't make out what he looked like or what exactly he was holding. But I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I yelled, "Run!" And we bolted out of there as fast as our legs could carry us. Undefined. Straight Fallout 3 vibes. Surprised the guy running didn't tell Gary. Wow. I can't believe I have a place to tell this story. When I was in middle school we went upstate in the summer. There was an abandoned house in the woods we explored. Top floor was pretty pristine, the beds were made and drawers/closets shut with stuff neatly arranged inside. There were bats. The lower you went the more disordered. The basement/garage was in complete disarray. Books and random crap thrown around. Beer cans and used condoms. We went to the far end of the house where the wall partially collapsed, and that's when we saw the bear. Foolishly ran with all our might. Thankfully the house between us and bear's lack of interest is why I'm typing this. You must not have been his type. I'm just glad he's practicing safe sex. I had crept an abandoned house in Seattle in the 90s. The guy had recently died. But not before hoarding 3 stories worth of groceries. Unopened QVC orders and tons of ephemera. The power and water had been shut off. And he was speeping and pissing in buckets. I opened a couple of these. Which would have been revolting on its own, but for some reason. He was putting wigs and toupees in with the waste. There were stacks of wigs that had yet to be put in the buckets. I did get 3 big bags of Liberty dimes before I fled in disgust. Aye nice. A friend and I were exploring an abandoned mental facility that had been purchased by a large computer CO. Here in Silicon Valley. The compound was massive, it had its own sheriff. Slaughterhouse. Industrial mechanic shop. On-site homes for the employees, everything a small town would have, in addition to the hospital. School and a beautiful mansion. All but the mansion were being demolished. The hospital had some creepy, though typical of the time, rooms and equipment, etc. Went through every house, storage unit, outbuilding on the property and found some amazing things. With nothing negative of any kind happening. Then we went into the library. We went up a spiral staircase into the belfry. I think that's what it's called. From the minute we entered the building I was nervous and uncomfortable. On the way up we'd passed rooms full of books and were going to check them out on the way out. There was no one else on the property. And the staircase was made of narrow metal stairs. From the top of the stairs you could see all the way to the bottom. We both heard footsteps coming up the stairs. But when we looked no one was there. We looked in all the rooms on the way down and nothing. There was no other way in or out. Suddenly I was filled with a terror I've never felt before or since. I'm not religious but began praying for my life. We left immediately and the feeling stopped once we left the building. My friend felt something. She said. But not to the level I did. No idea what happened there. Bulletin it was truly bizarre. There's an old saying there are no atheists in a foxhole. Which is a fancy way of saying it doesn't matter how much you do or don't believe in God. Everyone prays when they're piss your pants scared. Abandoned insane asylum on Long Island. Giant place with plenty of history. My friend and I were joking about getting haunted by lobotomized ghosts. We go in and start taking photos. One of the first shots came out with what seriously looked like a little orb dude. We decided to stop making fun of the undead. But we did forge ahead. It was very creepy. Especially when we found the morgue. Exploring an abandoned manor with some friends. We had been drinking and smoking and thought it would be cool. The ground floor entrances were covered with bricks, so we had to enter through the first floor 8 feet height using an improvised ladder made of old trash and wood pieces. It was quite unstable and hard to climb, and we were 5 or 6 people. Being the only way out. And knowing how slow it was. I was on edge the whole time. We were exploring the floor. Cool glass ceiling. Lots of debris. But suddenly we find a room filled with plastic containers with pink and brown liquids. Some friends decide to explore the ground floor, which was pitch black and involved going down a broken staircase missing several steps. They heard someone coughing in the dark and feel several people moving in the darkness as their eyes get used to it. At this point I was hearing someone slowly walking in a room on the first floor, carefully stepping over the broken glass on the floor to not make noise, which was really creepy. We got the beep away, and on our way out we saw a roughed up man with bloodshot eyes leaving a shack outside the house and staring at us. I still shiver when I remember his look. Probably just some junkies living there, but for overly high 15-year-olds it was scary as beep. I was with 2 others. I wandered off because I like to go explore on my own sometimes. I heard whispering and thought they were beeping with me. Turns out they weren't even near me at the time. Beep, that's beep. We haven't gone back since. Homeless folks take shelter wherever they can. They may have been hiding from you out of fear you'd report them for trespassing. I would never snitch, but perhaps you're right because they wouldn't know that. I was certain no one else was there though. Guess we will never know. When I was in high school, me and a bunch of friends piled into my friend's car and drove up to some abandoned houses near our town. The houses were bought by a big company to tear them down to build more office space. But the project was abandoned and the houses were never torn down. They had been empty for about 20 years at that point. I really didn't want to go. But I had just gotten into the cool crowd and I wanted to fit in. So I went along. The houses were falling apart, covered in graffiti and trash. And it was dead silent and pitch dark out. The only light we had were our cell phone flashlights. Most of us were terrified. But a few of the older boys were being rowdy and making a lot of noise. I told them to shut up because I didn't want the cops to come. And I knew this was also a hot spot for squatters and I didn't want us to get robbed and / or murdered. The whole time I kept feeling like I was hearing beep behind me. But I tried to brush it off thinking it was just my imagination. About the 3rd house we went to, I found an old Victorian doll covered in dust and cobwebs on the staircase. I don't know why. But I picked it up to look at it. It was creepy as all beep. One eye missing and matted hair and torn clothing. I quickly put it down and walked away to continue exploring. A few minutes later, in dead silence besides our footsteps creaking on the old wooden floors, we heard, "Mama," in a soft child's voice, coming from the doll. I looked at my friends. They looked at me. We hightailed it back to the car and sped away. Never went back after that. Shit dude, have you seen Annabelle? Several years ago, a man was murdered in the city I was working in and parts of his body were turning up at various locations. I think his hand and foot had been found and a week had passed. I'm an architectural designer and I was surveying an abandoned chapel that was slated to be renovated into condos. It was apparent that homeless people had been squatting in the chapel, but I wasn't sure how recently they had been there. When I went into the basement though, it was clear someone was either there or had just left based on the smell. There were no lights due to the power being cut and I didn't stick around long enough to see if anyone was currently occupying the space. 2 days later someone reported that they found the torso and head of the murdered man in the building attached to the chapel. I had been too freaked out by the smell in the basement to continue on to the attached building. But I'm almost certain I would have been the one to find the body.